presentation will likely run 30 to 40 minutes, followed by an audience Q&A session. Our program can be viewed tonight on Crowdcast, as well as our Facebook and YouTube pages. To watch with closed captioning, head to YouTube, where you can enable real-time captions by clicking the CC button in the bottom right corner of the player. The video will be available for rewatching immediately following tonight's broadcast. And one word on the questions: you'll have to submit your questions using the Ask a Question button on Crowdcast. Although we cannot guarantee we'll be able to get to every question, we will try to address as many as possible. Town Hall is adding new events and new podcasts every day. Upcoming programs include Aaron Bobrow-Strain on the experience of undocumented immigrants, acclaimed economist Stephanie Kelton on the myth of deficits and her blueprint for an economy centered around working people. And this weekend, we just announced 3 successive evenings of archival programming focusing on issues of race and social justice. On Friday night, Ijeoma Oluo will discuss her 2019 book, So You Want to Talk About Race. On Saturday, we'll replay Beverly Tatum's event for Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? And on Sunday, we'll replay Michael Tatum in conversation with Jesse Hagopian discussing his 2018 book, Things That Make White People Uncomfortable. We feature these events from our past. It seems like a great time to remind you that those events and so many more are available in our digital media library. It's kind of a memory hole, really, for life as it used to be back in February. We are grateful tonight to partner with the Hanford Challenge, a nonprofit watchdog based in Seattle with a mission to create a future for the Hanford nuclear site that secures human health and safety, advances accountability, and promotes a sustainable environmental legacy. Town Hall's work, meanwhile, is made possible through the support of our sponsors. Civics programming in particular is courtesy of the Real Networks Foundation, the True Brown Foundation, KUOW, and the Wyncote Foundation Northwest. But as most of you know, Town Hall is fundamentally a member-supported organization, and I want to thank all of our members watching our program tonight. One last point about Town Hall. Town Hall and the nonprofit community at large have been put under significant strain through the recent wave of event cancellations. We hope you'll consider extending your generosity to support us during this difficult time by making a donation through clicking the donate button, frankly, at the bottom of your screen, or by becoming a member. You can also make a donation online or by texting Town Hall to the words Town Hall to 44321. They'll open up a pane where you can give there as well. All right, then. On to our program.
This is a gallon, and this is nuclear waste, and this is 56 million gallons of nuclear waste. It's toxic, radioactive, and is sitting in old, leaky tanks just a few hours upriver from Portland. It's here at Hanford, where all that waste is polluting groundwater, which is seeping toward the Columbia River, and after more than 20 years and $19 billion spent, none of it has been treated. For decades, Hanford was America's plutonium factory. It was one of the original Manhattan Project sites, supplying the radioactive material at the heart of America's nuclear arsenal. Over the course of Hanford's military lifetime, it was home to 9 nuclear reactors used to irradiate uranium fuel rods, creating plutonium. That plutonium was then extracted with chemicals, processed, and shipped off to weapons factories. Each step of that process produced radioactive waste, some of it liquid, some of it solid, some of it somewhere in between. For decades, workers poured much of the liquid waste, hundreds of billions of gallons worth, into the ground. They dumped the rest, including solids and sludges, into underground tanks to be dealt with later. And now, it's later. A patch of contaminated groundwater the size of Seattle lies under the site. Those old tanks are deteriorating, and the official plan to clean it all up has serious problems. The basic idea is to pump up and treat the groundwater, get the waste out of the tanks, and process it into glass logs. The first big problem is that radioactive waste can generate flammable gases, which can build up in the tanks and treatment facilities, and, if ignited, on top of that, some of the waste in the tanks still contains plutonium, which is heavy. And as the waste is moved around, the plutonium could settle out, clump together, and start an uncontrolled chain reaction. That might not be such a big deal if workers could monitor and step in to prevent the accident, but the treatment process, at least for the most hazardous wastes, has to happen in special rooms, called black cells, that are too radioactive for humans to enter. According to the official plan, the machinery in those black cells has to work smoothly for 40 years with no direct human intervention. If something goes wrong, there would be little workers could do to prevent hazardous waste from spreading around the site. But the cleanup has made some progress. The liquid waste in the oldest, leakiest tanks was transferred to newer tanks. And in 2015, workers treated 2 billion gallons of groundwater. the vast majority of contaminated groundwater is still there, and they haven't even started treating the actual waste in the tanks. In fact, they haven't even finished building the treatment plants. Construction was supposed to be done by 2007. That slipped to 2011, then 2019, and recently the deadline was extended again to 2036 for the most dangerous waste. Humans have never cleaned up a mess quite like the waste at Hanford. And after years of delays, we don't know if the current plan will be up to the task. That means that without some breakthrough technology or new plan, those 56 million gallons of nuclear waste will likely continue to sit just hours upriver from Portland.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tom Carpenter, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. And thank you especially to Town Hall Seattle for co-hosting this event. Tonight, we will be blowing the whistle on the Hanford site. That video was produced by Oregon Public Broadcasting Earthfix, and we thank them for the ability to use that video. And one thing I want to point out is a lot of the information in that video came from insiders at the Hanford site. And it's important to realize that a lot of what we hear about Hanford, especially when it's not good news, comes from those very same insiders. So we helped Dr. Walter Tamasitis, who is the Director of Research and Technology at Hanford, at the waste treatment plant, and Donna Bushy, the head of environmental and nuclear safety, come forward with their concerns about explosion risks at that waste treatment plant. And, in return for them pointing out these problems, really doing their jobs, they were terminated. They didn't take that line down. They came to Hanford Challenge. We helped them with their concerns. We went to Congress. We went to agencies. They testified. We went before the news media. And after several years, it became clear that they were correct, and now portions of that plant are deemed pretty, too unsafe to open. So I say that because it's very important to realize that, the Hanford site, as dangerous as it is, has a long ways to go before it's considered safe and before it's considered cleaned up. I started Hanford Challenge in order to work with whistleblowers at places like Hanford. I started working on Hanford. Actually, I've been working on DOE facilities, Department of Energy nuclear facilities, for some 40 years now. In 1986, when I was a younger lawyer in Washington, D.C., I got a call from a guy named Ed Bricker. And Ed Bricker had seen me on a TV show talking about another nuclear site. And he was also a young worker at the Hanford site. And he told me he was a third generation Hanford employee, that he had grown up in the Tri-Cities, and that he was concerned because he was now the target of retaliation and harassment and was worried that he was going to get terminated because he had been reporting safety issues both to his management as well as to Congress. And the House Energy and Commerce Committee had opened investigations into safety and environmental issues at Hanford. And Ed Bricker was one of the people that they talked to, and Hanford knew that, and they became very uncomfortable with the fact that he was speaking out. And what eventually happened was management ordered the security department to develop a program to result in Ed's termination. And they called him a spy for the government. Now think about that. What government were they working for? It was pretty amazing that they would isolate someone like this, who's raising very, very important safety concerns. Safety concerns like plutonium solutions being misrouted to the desert floor because the blueprints didn't match the actual configuration of the facility. And so we helped Ed go through Congress, go to the news media. It took 4 to 5 years, to really resolve his case. But in the meantime, he really helped break a path for other people to come forward, other whistleblowers, and they've come out of the woodwork. There have been hundreds of whistleblowers at the Hanford site over the years. We've helped many of them. They have disclosed the fact that tanks are leaking at the Hanford site that weren't, that Hanford had tried to keep a secret for a year. And it was because of Mike Geffrey, for instance, that we know that a double shell tank failed in 2012. And Hanford at first denied it, and then they had to admit it. That changes a lot at Hanford when things like that come forward. It helps Congress fund the site and get the cleanup going. But we've got a long way to go to make sure that this site is cleaned up and that it does not turn into a problem for the Northwest or for the nation in terms any more than it is already, because shortcuts cannot be tolerated there. You can't really have mistakes at a nuclear site with such large inventories of radioactive and chemical facilities. Hanford is the most contaminated facility in the United States. And again, it's a fire, an explosion, a natural disaster could both contaminate the river, contaminate the air, and gravely affect the regions around us. And of course, that's unacceptable. So our goal is to make sure that people on the inside are protected when they come forward with information, that we listen to that information, that we protect those people when they talk, that they're protected when they do the work. And we're going to hear from people today that are part of that whole program. Tom Mueller is a author, and he wrote a book called Crisis of Conscience. And Hanford caught his attention. I spent some time with him, introducing him to some whistleblowers, and he took off and wrote a whole chapter on Hanford whistleblowers. And it's just an amazing book. I highly encourage people to look at it. And we're going to hear from him, and then we're going to hear from Attorney General Bob Ferguson, who has brought litigation to force Hanford cleanup to be on deadlines, to meet their deadlines, and to protect workers at the site. But first, let's go to Tom Mueller, and then we'll go to some questions and answers after everyone speaks. And Tom, I invite you to step in here. Tom is from Italy, and he's speaking from Italy, but his connection is a little rough, so we may or may not see him, but we'll hear his voice. Tom Mueller, please.
So thank you, Tom Carpenter, for that generous introduction. And it's an honor to take part in this timely and important event, blowing the whistle on Hanford at Town Hall, Seattle. I wish we could do this in person, but the pandemic has decided otherwise. Growing up, I spent a lot of time in the Pacific Northwest, particularly in Spokane, Washington, and in Portland, Oregon. And as a child, I had heard about Hanford. I had heard about downwinders. I had heard about plutonium. I'd heard about the Fat Man bomb that flattened Nagasaki. But mostly Hanford for me was that big blank spot on the road map down near the Washington-Oregon line as we drive from Spokane to Washington, Spokane to Portland. And that patch on the map as big as greater LA with room to spare, I always looked at that and thought, what is going on there? But it wasn't really until a couple of years ago when I wrote Crisis of Conscience, my book on whistleblowing, and which devotes a chapter to Hanford Nuclear Reservation and the whistleblowers there, that I really got to understand what's happening in Hanford, and to appreciate the colossal danger that place represents to all of us. In the course of reporting my book, I interviewed more than 200 whistleblowers, but no stories that I heard were more shocking and more important. And no whistleblowers that I met had done a more fundamental service to the welfare of this nation than whistleblowers at Hanford. So my central message tonight is very simple. Hanford Nuclear Reservation needs to become a household name in America, throughout America, because of the massive dangers that it represents, and because of the huge waste and outright theft of tax dollars that is going on right now as we speak. So I'd like to say a few things about whistleblowing in general, and then come back to Hanford and show how they apply in this specific case of Hanford Nuclear Reservation. We live in an age of whistleblowing. This is the age of the whistleblower. Whistleblowers have a louder voice, a more important role, and more laws at their disposal to help them make their disclosures than at any time in history, despite what the current administration is trying to do to silence them and to rebrand them as spies. Whistleblowers have already revealed and are currently revealing a lot of wrongdoing that we'd probably never learn from any other source. They've told us about deadly opioids being pushed by big pharma and lethal ignition switches and airbags in our cars. They've explained to us how Cambridge Analytica and Facebook have helped to corrupt our elections, and how kleptocrats and criminals are able to keep vast pools of wealth untaxed in secret offshore accounts. Whistleblowers have explained to us the lead-laced water in Flint, Michigan, and the toxic mortgages that helped crash our economy in 2008. And whistleblowers are now pinpointing systemic wrongdoing at immigration facilities on our southern border with Mexico, as well as the various frauds and abuses that are coming out of the pandemic. And no doubt in the future, whistleblowers will be instrumental in revealing fraud that takes advantage of the trillions of dollars being poured into COVID relief. Whistleblowers can even challenge a president, successfully, as in the case of Watergate with Richard Nixon, and unsuccessfully during the recent impeachment of Donald Trump. Over the last few decades, Congress has passed a remarkable number of laws to help whistleblowers report financial waste, fraud, and abuse, fight political corruption and dirty dealing, and protect against potential threats to public safety and the environment. Whistleblowers enjoy, at this moment, an unparalleled social recognition, again, despite what Donald Trump has tried to do. Films and books portray whistleblowers as heroes, Hollywood's leading men and women. Meryl Streep, George Clooney, Keira Knightley, Matt Damon, Michelle Pfeiffer, Tom Hanks, they're all playing whistleblowers, heroic whistleblowers, to rave reviews. And we've all heard the names: Daniel Ellsberg, Karen Silkwood, Aaron Brockovich, Frank Serpico. They're all, for us, persons of conscience, people who step forward at great personal risk to serve the public good. We all recognize, too, that we ignore whistleblowers at our great peril. And Seattle in particular, we can imagine the road not taken at Boeing. If only one of the dozen anonymous whistleblowers who tried to call out massive problems with the 737 MAX and its navigation system, if only one of those people had been heard, just imagine the loss of human life that could have been avoided and the damage to the company that could have been averted. While interviewing a large number of whistleblowers, I repeatedly encountered certain common characteristics of their organizations which drove their whistleblowing, because these same characteristics also facilitated the wrongdoing that they were calling out. 4 of these characteristics recurred again and again. One is an unhealthy melding of public and private, which is often embodied by gigantic government contractors and ineffectual, captured, or complicit regulators. Number 2, a cult of secrecy. Secrecy which allows an organization to conceal their frauds and actually gives them a sense of impunity. No one will ever know. A culture of money is the 3rd characteristic. A corporate obsession with milestone payments and bonuses, which often trumps quality and safety. And finally, the 4th characteristic that recurred again and again in whistleblowing environments: major risks to human safety. And that, folks, brings us straight back to Hanford Nuclear Reservation, which unfortunately does tick every one of the boxes, raise every one of the red flags for an environment that drives whistleblowing and fraud. Hanford is a paradigm whistleblower hotspot. Hanford has produced hundreds and hundreds of whistleblowers over decades of its existence. And I would venture to say that there are more whistleblowers per square foot in Hanford than in any other place in the world, with the exception of Washington, D.C. All the telltale signs are here: an unhealthy melding of public and private, enormous nuclear cleanup contractors taking multi-billion-dollar government contracts, and in an environment where huge conflicts of interest are the order of the day, and the revolving door is spinning constantly. In fact, it's stuck open. It's stopped spinning. There is no door between public and private. The Department of Energy is a totally captured regulator. I know that Tom Carpenter and Bob Ferguson need to maintain at least cordial relations with the department. I do not. I can tell you straight out, the DOE is outnumbered and outgunned by the contractors, and worse, it's serving them far more often than it serves US taxpayers. At Hanford, there is an obsession with secrecy. Once upon a time, of course, this was justified. Hanford was part of the ultra top secret Manhattan Project, and then during the Cold War, helped produce most of the plutonium for America's nuclear arsenal. But folks, the Cold War is over, long over. The Cold War aura of secrecy remains. And secrecy today doesn't serve national security. It serves as the ideal way to conceal waste, fraud, and abuse. There is a cult of money at Hanford, a vast sprawling river of money as wide as the Columbia River. More than $2 billion a year flows into Hanford, and not a penny of it, I can guarantee you, flows out again. The historian Rodney Carlisle coined the term nuclear pork to describe what's going on in Hanford, and that's sadly apt. There's a pervasive culture of bonuses and milestone payments, which all too often leads to a culture of wrongdoing as standard operating procedure. Just have a look at the online federal contractor misconduct database. You'll find darn near every one of the major contractors that have worked at Hanford over the years. AECOM, Bechtel, CH2M Hill, Fluor, Honeywell, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, they are all here. All of them have repeatedly settled major lawsuits or paid major fines for misuse of tax dollars or worse. And the damage isn't, unfortunately, limited just to financial fraud. A culture that commits financial fraud also produces bad work, produces corner cutting and rushed schedules, and therefore produces at Hanford an enormous threat to public health. And this threat ranges from threats to people who work at Hanford on the tank farm, people who live in the Tri-Cities, the Hanford community, people in the Pacific Northwest, and people in the nation. Now, I've made Hanford sound pretty bad. It's actually a gorgeous, gorgeous place. I strongly recommend you visit it. It is, at least on the surface, one of the last remaining patches of pristine high desert steppe in North America. The Columbia flows through a stretch of the river called the Hanford Reach, which is really pristine. It has a thriving salmon run. You'll see elk and mule deer and waterfowl and coyotes and lots of wildlife. But if you just scratch the surface a little bit, you'll find a lot of unhealthy surprises. A lot of those elk and deer and coyotes are hot. They're radioactive. So are the salmon and the herons and the mergansers, at least in some cases. Some of the freshwater mussels have been shown to be hot. At least one hot alligator escaped into the river from radiation experiments done by Hanford scientists. If you know where to dig, you'll also find the bodies of 828 dead beagles that were killed in radiation experiments, bodies of pygmy goats and pigs, spent nuclear submarine engines as big as trailer homes, and entire train cars buried whole because they were literally too hot to handle. And everywhere you go at Hanford, you will find wells, pits, French drains, trenches, and cribs, which hold nearly 1 million cubic meters of solid nuclear waste and 500 billion gallons of liquid waste that were injected into the soil over the decades or simply dumped. There are entire giant buildings at Hanford, some as big as ocean liners, each a potential environmental and human disaster. The canister storage building, the waste encapsulation storage facility, the central waste complex, the Purex facility. These structures contain hundreds of millions of curies of radiation, far more than released at Chernobyl and Fukushima. They are old, built in the 60s and 70s, and they are literally falling apart. Worst of all, of course, is the tank farms, as we've seen in the introductory video. 56 million gallons of the deadliest waste in the Western Hemisphere in 177 underground tanks that are all long past their best by date, and many, if not most, are leaking. Plumes of toxicity descend under 85 square miles of the Hanford terrain. Some of these plumes have reached groundwater, most of which flows into the Columbia River. And that's just the slow motion catastrophe of Hanford. That is just as sure as death and taxes. Other disasters could happen in the flicker of an eye. a hydrogen explosion in one of those underground tanks, or an ammo dump explosion that sets off multiple tanks, which would make Fukushima or Chernobyl look like a Boy Scout campfire. That is no exaggeration. To solve the tank waste problem, which is arguably the biggest waste problem and environmental problem in America today, apart from global warming, a team of top nuclear engineers designed the vitrification plant, VIT plant, or waste treatment plant. And that, again, was sketched in the introductory video. What that video didn't capture was a level of incompetence, waste, and outright fraud that has been involved in building that plant for decades, or not building that plant more properly. I detail this case in great detail in my book, Crisis of Confidence, and I profile the whistleblowers who brought this story to light, particularly Walt Temositis, Donna Bushy, and Gary Brunson. Now, as we've heard, this vitally important facility should be processing this deadly waste today instead of having it leak into the soil. But it won't be ready, they say, until 2036. Maybe. It is really an open question when this vital facility is going to come online. But we've lost count of the billions that we've already paid to contractors to do this work, who include Bechtel, URS, which is now AECOM, and others. And work which, it turns out, has not been completed. Worse still, much of the work that they've already done may have to be ripped out and replaced because a recent lawsuit determined that it was of indeterminate quality, which is not what you want in a nuclear waste facility processing the most deadly nuclear waste in the Americas. Every day we wait for the VIT plant to open for business, more tanks at Hanford spring leaks. More deadly nuclear waste seeps into the ground, into the groundwater, into the Columbia. Every day that we wait for that plant, Hanford's nuclear waste comes closer to you. So where are the regulators? Where are the cops who are supposed to be riding herd on this operation? The Department of Energy is not only regulating these wrongdoers, it often resembles their co-conspirator. That is no exaggeration. The DOE does not hold contractors responsible. Rather, they cover up for them and often facilitate their brutal retaliation against whistleblowers, as Tom Carpenter described in the story of Ed Bricker. That is on the DOE as much as it is on Ed Bricker's contractor employer. Apart from exceptional people, like former DOE employee Gary Brunson, who have to actually become whistleblowers at the Department of Energy just to do their job, which is keeping us safe, the DOE is not on our side. The latest DOE scandal demonstrates that this organization has completely other priorities from protecting us. Now that the VIT plant is dead in the water, the DOE's latest scheme for taking care of this high-level nuclear waste is simply to reclassify it as low-level, pour a cement cap over it, and walk away. It's a bit like the current administration's plan for global warming. Pretend it doesn't exist and ignore it. The problem is we do have to deal with this, or it will deal with us. I'm sorry I'm sounding a bit doom and gloom, but I'm trying to be honest about what the situation is at Hanford and the shock that I felt when I learned. This is coming down the pike or the river at all of us right now. So we can pretend that it's not, but that's magical thinking. And this fairy tale will not have a happy ending because nuclear waste, like nuclear explosions, aren't the stuff of magic. This is not a fairy tale. These are prosaic, deadly realities which require our swift and vigorous attention. And in conclusion, I'd like to celebrate the people who actually are acting swiftly and vigorously about this. The people whose superb work, like my fellow speakers, who are fighting the good fight at Hanford. I salute Attorney General Bob Ferguson and Tom Carpenter and his team at Hanford Challenge for their vital role in keeping Hanford workers safe and keeping us all safe from what's going on at Hanford. You'll hear more from Bob about his paradigm lawsuits and the good that they've done. Right now, I want to stress the vital role that Hanford Challenge has played and is playing as a trusted partner for hundreds and hundreds of whistleblowers over the last 40 years. Now, whistleblowing is a terribly lonely, isolated, dangerous business. And Hanford Challenge has been a safe house for whistleblowers They provided savvy legal advice and incredibly important strategic indications for how to get whistleblowers' disclosures to the appropriate people, whether they be law enforcement or the press. Thanks to Hanford Challenge, whistleblowers have saved us from many disasters over the decades. Without Hanford Challenge, many of those same whistleblowers would never have been heard. And I'm thinking again of the anonymous whistleblowers at Boeing. If the Hanford Challenge whistleblowers had not been heard with the help of Hanford Challenge, there might have been potentially catastrophic results. So we all owe Hanford Challenge an enormous debt of gratitude. They need our support to continue and expand their life-saving work. I'd like to conclude with a call to the people of Seattle, the people of the Pacific Northwest, and the people of the nation. Please find out what is going on at Hanford Nuclear Reservation in your name as taxpayers. And please support Hanford Challenge and Attorney General Ferguson and all the other groups who are fighting for a thorough cleanup at Hanford, both of its nuclear waste and of its pervasive culture of wrongdoing. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Tom. And now we're going to turn to Bob Ferguson, who has, even though he has a very busy life and a very big job, he has paid a lot of attention to what's going on at the Hanford site. And I wrote him a letter, I guess, in 2014, and you were a new Attorney General then, and I said, hey, there's some vapor exposures going on at the Hanford site, and we ought to do something about it. And I was shocked to get a response. I mean, I write a lot of letters, but this was like, let's talk. And we then went on to bring litigation that really kind of shook Hanford to its core, because it finally ended the era of toxic vapor exposures at Hanford, thanks to you. So, Bob, thank you for coming on tonight, and I'm going to turn it over to you for your comments, and then we'll do some Q&A.
It's a deal, and thanks, Tom Carpenter, and to both Tom Mueller as well. Thanks to you both. It's great to hear your voices, and thanks for all you're doing. Good evening to everybody. Hope you're all doing healthy during this challenging time. It's great to see you all in this format. And Tom Carpenter, you said you were surprised to get a response to that letter. I remember that letter well. I was a pretty brand new Attorney General at that time, and I can actually tell you why you got that response, and that is, I'm from a family of 7 here in Washington State. I'm 4th generation. So my family of 7, it's 6 boys, 1 long-suffering sister. So it's a little lopsided in my family. And 6 of my siblings live here. 6 of us live here in Washington State. And one of my brothers, my brother John, one of my older brothers, every year he lives here in Washington State, but every year he goes up in the spring to Alaska. He works in the fishing industry. He's been going up for decades now. And when he goes up to Alaska, he's there for months. He'll come back in September. And look, John's got a really challenging job that helps put fish on the table for all of us here in the Northwest. But it's a demanding job on many, many levels. And look, as his brother, obviously, I expect that his employer will provide a safe work environment for him in that challenging job that benefits so many people. Lots riding on that. His wife, his kids, a whole community that loves him. Well, as Attorney General, I view my job in part is to make sure that all working men and women in this state have a safe, secure work environment, just like I expect for my brother John. And so if that's not happening, I take it as personally as if it's my brother that's happening to. And so, Tom, when you wrote that letter, which I do remember very well, while I was aware of Hanford, obviously, and certainly as a new Attorney General, I was aware that previous AGs like Rob McKenna and Chris Gregoire had battled Hanford issues in the courts on the cleanup, the pace of the cleanup that you heard a little bit about from the video and saw in the video as well. Well, I was certainly very much aware of it. The specific issue and the details of the specific issue of the harm being done to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Hanford workers over year after year, stretching back a couple decades, was outrageous to me. I mean, truly. And just to give a sense of scale to the folks who are listening in, as I became better acquainted with the issue, thanks to folks like Tom at Hanford Challenge and meeting with workers, which I may speak a bit more about in a moment. I'm going to keep this pretty brief, but I just, as an American, I found it outrageous that our government had report after report done of the working conditions at Hanford, And those reports showed over and over, their own reports put together by the federal government showed a link between the vapors at these tank farms where the workers are working and those workers being hospitalized, in many cases with very serious illnesses. And look, if someone's got a tougher job in the state and trying to clean out the tank farms at Hanford, hey, raise your hand, let me know, because I don't think there's a tougher job. And yet our federal government was not providing, to put it very mildly, a safe work environment for those workers. Look, I would often say that, look, I'm convinced that if all the workers at Hanford were all the sons and daughters of members of Congress, there wouldn't be a problem for the workers there. They'd be taken care of. But hey, to your point, Tom Mueller, Hanford, most Americans have no idea what Hanford is or where it is or what's going on there. And so those voices and the harm done to those workers, quite tragically, went unheeded for too long. And so, thanks to Tom Carpenter and others, I had the chance to meet workers. Senator Ron Wyden from Oregon, who's been a strong supporter on these issues. We met with Tom, of course, and Senator Wyden with a group of workers. I remember that conversation, which was heartbreaking in the extreme. And it just became pretty clear to me that something had to be done. If 20 reports by the federal government showing the harm to workers wasn't enough to change the behavior of the federal government, well, then a 21st report wasn't going to do it, and a 22nd report wasn't going to do it, and a 23rd report wasn't going to do it. That sometimes you've got to use the law to make a change, to file a lawsuit. And look, obviously I've had a lot of litigation against this current administration, the Trump administration. People forget the first administration I filed a lawsuit against was the Obama administration on Hanford cleanup and Hanford workers. Doesn't matter to me who the president is. If you're harming workers in this state, that's a problem. And one thing I want to really emphasize just before I wrap up is, I say this to my team a lot, is as lawyers, of course, our job when filing a lawsuit is to articulate the case, to cite the cases, use that precedent, build a legal case, of course, in whatever the issue is that we're working on. But really, at the end of the day, I think what lawyers do, what good lawyers do, and my team is a team of great lawyers and professional staff, is you're telling a story, right? You're telling a story to the judge. You're telling a story about what's going on in your case, whatever that case is. And I can assure you we would not have been successful in this case had it not been for the voices of those workers, filing those declarations, being whistleblowers, being willing to file those declarations. And to your point, Tom Mueller, earlier, that's a challenge for a worker to take that big step. But thankfully, because of those voices, the lawsuit with Hanford Challenge, with the local union out there at Hanford, we all combined forces, brought a lawsuit that was successful. I won't go into the details of the resolution, but that resolution has protected workers. We have not seen workers hospitalized for vapor exposures since that resolution of that lawsuit. The federal government had to pay $1 million back for the costs and fees of bringing the litigation in the first place, which should never have come to that. But the most important thing is putting those protections in place for the workers. And I just want to add, it takes a village to make these things successful. Folks like Susanna Frame, she's a reporter for King 5. She did a whole series of stories. And again, her stories were masterful because she just put the workers on camera and let them tell their stories. And I remember one worker in particular, I'll never forget, that worker said that what happened to that worker at Hanford, he said, ruined my life, literally destroyed me, were the words that worker used. And look, just as the attorney for the people of the state of Washington, you can't see something like that or hear something like that and not feel like you have to use every tool at your disposal in order to stand up for the workers. So it's a rewarding case, obviously, to put it very mildly. There's a lot of work still to do, to put it very mildly. I'm so thankful there are groups like Hanford Challenge who are there for workers every day, like the local union out there, and writers like Tom Mueller who bring this issue to the public in a detailed way that's easy to understand as well. So it's great to be with all of you, and thanks so much for the chance to say a few words. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Bob. That's great. And if you have a question, you can use your icon down there where it says ask a question and put it down there, or vote on someone else's question if you think that's a good thing to do. And I had a question for both of you, which is the rights of whistleblowers to fight back once they're discriminated against or lose their jobs or whatever happens to them. Are you hopeful that a new administration at the federal level would do better to protect whistleblowers, and how could they? What are some of the things that need to be done for that? And Tom Mueller, why don't we start with you?
Well, as in corporate fraud, dealing with whistleblowers is driven to a large extent by tone at the top. The tone that's being set at the very highest level trickles down, whether it's the CEO or the commander-in-chief or whoever. Right now, it's a time when the tone at the top is, loyalty is more important than truth and justice, and I can crush these people. And the reality is that although the laws to protect whistleblowers are strong, there are many ways in which you can theoretically make whistleblowers whole, but in practice make their lives unlivable. And that's where we are right now. And I think we need to shift back. A lot of progress has been made since the 60s when, whistleblowers were snitches and there really wasn't much positive energy around whistleblowers. In the year 2000, 3 women whistleblowers were on the cover of Time magazine. And a lot of progress has been made. Those laws are strong. But if there isn't a real will to respect the content as well as the letter of the law, whistleblowers will always be exposed.
Bob?
Yeah, I think it's be hard to add too much to that answer from Tom, but I guess what I would say to answer your question directly, Tom, is that yes, with a new administration help, it certainly can't be any worse, right? In terms of that voice from the top. And look, I often say, like in any relationship, a personal relationship, for example, once you say something, you can't take it back. You maybe will say you're sorry, but once it's out there, it's out there. You can't take it back. And words have consequences. Words have meaning in any relationship. And that is certainly true from what a president says about any topic. And I often think sometimes the language from the administration on multiple fronts can be amongst the most damaging things that's going to happen. And whistleblowers is a good example to what Tom was saying, that language that's being used about whistleblowers does a lot of harm, and it will take a lot of repair work on behalf not just of a future president or future administration, but everybody who's watching this, right, to affirm the importance of whistleblowers, the bravery of whistleblowers who risk so much to come forward. And I think we all have a role to play in that. But yes, I do think a new administration would certainly help in affirming that critical role that whistleblowers play in our society.
Thanks, Bob. We have a question from the audience, has a couple of votes. The question is Hanford just a cleanup site these days, or does any production or manufacturing still go on there? And if so, what is it? And the answer to that is Hanford left the production mode in 1989. It was declared officially over, and in terms of making plutonium or anything else. So all of the facilities have been shut down that were part of that whole system. I'll point out that was in 1989, and we are still here, dealing with a huge, huge mess. And that's the federal government announced last year that the cost of cleaning up the Hanford site is going to be as high as $660 billion and take decades. And they're trying to get around that now and make it not as costly by, as Tom Mueller pointed out, relabeling nuclear waste as low level or low activity waste. So someone else wrote and said, can someone speak to the issues at Hanford as compared with modern potential for disposal of nuclear power waste? And, that's more of a technical question. I don't know, Tom Mueller, if you have any thoughts about that. Go ahead.
Now, I don't know specifically nuclear power, but the vitrification process was successfully used at Savannah River. And in fact, Walt Thomas, one of the blowers, worked at Savannah River first and became expert in this process. The waste at Hanford is extraordinarily complicated, extraordinarily diverse in its form, from chunks of ice, things shaped like rock almost, to slurries to liquid, and has proved far more difficult than Savannah River to deal with.
Yes, it's Savannah River waste is tougher. It's a different kind of waste, but it's all nuclear waste. Whether it comes from a commercial plant or from the Department of Energy, and there are similar problems facing us with both tracks. Someone writes, currently DOE reimburses the federal contractors for costs associated with whistleblowers and legal challenges. And even after contractors are found guilty, DOE pays for the cost incurred to prepare and defend legal challenges from whistleblowers. So no incentive is in place to comply when you get paid back for your cost. And are you familiar with that, Tom Mueller? Or do you know about that?
Yes, unfortunately. Donna Bushy and others apprised me of this situation, the outrageous situation in which her tax dollars were being used to her in court. And very high level, a bank of very high level defense lawyers accompanied the contractors everywhere they went, to every deposition, to every. It's an outrageous thing that whistleblowers would be, would fund their own attack against them. So we need to really think. I mean, that's the DOE, and we write the contractors basically a check. They get to up, when they say, well, we'll do it for $4 million, and then $8 million, and then $10 million. We need to be stricter in holding contractors to the original agreement and not allow them to use our resources, our money, which is still money, to victimize whistleblowers.
Thanks, Tom. So, Bob, you've brought a number of actions against Hanford, and part of that is trying to make them live up to their cleanup agreements, and they have a cleanup agreement. Could you explain how that process works out there and what the state's role is on that?
Sure. So it can be very complicated, of course, as you well know, Tom, but in essence, oversimplifying quite a bit, back when Chris Gregoire was Attorney General, there was litigation around the slow pace of cleanup at Hanford, which was documented in the video, and Tom mentioned as well. As a result of that litigation, there ended up being something called a tri-party agreement. So different parties coming together to put an agreement in place and a timeline for when there'd be certain deadlines in which the federal government would clean up Hanford. One of the signatories to that agreement was the Office of the Attorney General. That's sort of the hook that future AGs like Rob McKenna and myself could bring litigation asserting that the federal government was violating that tri-party agreement. So there's an agreement that lays out these deadlines in excruciating detail, and that gives me the power as Attorney General to litigate that cleanup issue, which we did early in my first term as Attorney General. I guess just a couple of thoughts about that is, there's no doubt in my mind that this issue of the cleanup at Hanford, and frankly, worker safety issues at Hanford, will be issues that the next Attorney General after me, and probably the one after that, and unfortunately, maybe my daughter will be the Attorney General in about 2055. And we'll still be grappling with these issues. So early vote for Pete Ferguson on that. But in all seriousness, right, that these issues will be around for a long, long time. So the way I view this is that while I have my time as Attorney General, it's important to use the tools that I have under that tri-party agreement that give me certain powers as the Attorney General to try and hold the administration's feet to the fire. One thing I will add, Tom, is, it's a big question where I could go on all day, but when we filed that early litigation on the cleanup, I wish I had the quote right in front of me, but we were successful at that. And I remember a federal judge wrote in the Eastern District of Washington, wrote about our case when we brought it. And she used words that were about the utter lack of transparency from the federal government in the information provided to the public about what the hell's going on at Hanford, excuse my language. And the idea that a federal judge would use such strong language about our government, about something as important as Hanford, the cleanup, and what the heck's going on out there, I just find, just speaking as a citizen, as a Washingtonian, and just how outrageous that is. So that has certainly sort of fueled my passion on this issue, that the government owes it to the people on an issue of this magnitude to be transparent so we can have a robust conversation. We shouldn't have to rely on whistleblowers who risk so much losing their jobs and risk so much to come forward. So maybe one last thing I'll add is that, to give you a sense of the scale, the challenge we have with the federal government is in a recent legislative session, I think it was a year ago, Tom, you correct me if I get this wrong, but the state legislature passed a bipartisan law. They worked together to pass a law to make it a little bit easier for workers who have been harmed at Hanford to get the benefits they deserve for the harms they've suffered, for the illnesses that have been caused. Otherwise, it's a convoluted system. The federal government filed a lawsuit challenging the constitutionality and legality of that law. My team literally has had to go to court to defend the constitutionality and legality of that law. We won at the trial court, but the federal government didn't stop there. They're appealing that to the Federal Court of Appeals, and we have an argument coming up soon on that. Look, to me, it is just, I'm getting started on this. I probably shouldn't, but it is so discouraging. It is so discouraging that when a state legislature simply passes a law to make life a little bit easier for these workers who are taking on such a demanding job, for all of us, the entire nation, for all of us, and yet the federal government's going to sue because what? It might cost them a few more bucks. So I just want viewers to know who are watching, hey, the challenge is great in terms of what we're up against culturally at Hanford. I see Tom Mueller, I think, is trying to jump in as well, so I'll stop there.
No, Bob, first of all, please do keep going and don't stop with your work. It's extremely important. But yeah, I think what you're saying is absolutely right. When people come forward, whoever they are, and make a complaint, they become a challenge. They become, in a sense, a whistleblower. Even if they're talking about their damaged lungs, they become a figure that needs to be denigrated, pushed to the side, denied. And that's a problem. I mean, again, this is their lives and their livelihoods, but it's also our future. Your question raises a further question: whose government is this? I mean, whose side are they on? And we saw that with downwinders as well. I mean, the downwinders for a couple generations tried to get some sort of relief, and the federal government spent hundreds of millions of dollars to defeat those poor sick people instead of spending that money to cure them or help them.
Mm-hmm.
So someone writes and has 9 votes for this question: how can ordinary citizens help? And they write, social media is too cluttered. Trump is defending EPA and firing inspectors general, and the DOE is impenetrable. What meaningful social actions are possible, and how do we help? Who wants to take that?
I'll jump in on that and then turn over to Tom. But really, Tom Carpenter, I mean, you're uniquely situated to answer that. So I think just the first thing I would say is that first, thanks for the question and the 9 folks who like that question, because I hope folks come away from this conversation more informed about what the heck's going on at Hanford and the government's role with that. So I think what I would say, number one, is there are organizations out there, at the risk of the shameless plug for Tom Carpenter, right? There are organizations out there like Hanford Challenge that need your support. They do, to do the work they do. Hanford Challenge was a partner with the AG's office in bringing that lawsuit that brought accountability and much greater protections for workers. It didn't happen by accident. It takes a village. It's not just my office. It's working with Tom and his fantastic team as well, and the union out there. So supporting an organization that's on the front lines, find this, I think, goes without saying, is important. And number 2, what I would say is that Tom, you may have a stronger sense of this. You've been on this issue a lot longer than I have, but I have a goal of speaking to every Rotary Club in the state. There's like 187 of them. I've got like 6 to go, so I'm almost there. And especially when Hanford was in the news a lot, right? I would bring it up all the time at Rotaries all across the state. It was my experience. I was a little bit initially surprised that these are folks who are very involved in their communities, as you might imagine, Rotarians, right? But the awareness of what exactly was going on at Hanford was, was not maybe what you might think it would be. And so I would say, look, whatever you can do in your individual role as a resident of the state or wherever you reside to communicate about what's happening out there. Hey, if you see Susanna Frame do a news story on workers at Hanford, send that around, post on your Facebook page. There's a lot of information out there, and to educate people in the state, because it makes a difference. The state legislature acted to help out workers a year or so ago, in part because there was a groundswell of support, because of folks like Tom, because of Hanford Challenge, because of the litigation. You get the idea. Those things can make a difference. So I would not underestimate the power of an individual to help out on this issue.
And I will jump in and say that, there's Columbia Riverkeeper and Natural Resources Defense Council and other groups that are paying very close attention to what's going on at the Hanford site. And, part of our job is to digest a very complicated subject. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, in the next several weeks, there's going to be 4 public comment periods on things going on at Hanford. 1 or 2 of them is probably really worthy of some attention. One is the budget, and the other is this issue of relabeling high-level waste as low-activity waste and leaving it at the Hanford site. So that's an issue that's going to keep coming up. But then there's a lot of other, important issues, but, not one that we would bring to the level of trying to get the public to do something about it. We have Facebook sites, we have websites, we put out reports. You mentioned Susanna Frame. There's books like Tom Mueller's book, Crisis of Conscience. There's a great book called Plutopia by Kate Brown. And we do have an ambassador board at Hanford Challenge. So there's ways to plug in and get involved and, read books about it and educate each other. But mostly, I think what's going to help the most is for the governor to hear about it, for, our senators, our congressional representatives. Adam Smith does great work on behalf of Hanford, activism. And, he pays attention to what's going on there. It's not in his district, but he's very aware of it. And he is the chair of the House Armed Services Committee. So people ought to know stuff like that. And, they deserve, the support when they jump in. And Tom, did you want to jump in on this question?
I would just add that people should go to the Tri-Cities. They should see Hanford and see not only this beautiful landscape, spectacular land, what you can see of it, and appreciate what's at risk, but also get a sense of this place where the high school, the local teams, the Bombers, and their mascot is the mushroom cloud. And you can have an atomic burger and a meltdown burger and at the atomic. This is a strange place where money created this kind of tolerance for what most people would be pretty shocked to have on the other side of the river. So going and seeing this place, I think, really makes it a graphic. And if you can speak with some people who have been involved, some tank farm workers, some whistleblowers, anyone who knows about the site, it brings it to life.
Okay. Well, we have time for maybe another one or two questions, and we're running out of time. I'm looking on the list here. What work has been done to make public the health problems being suffered by public and the workers? There have always been strong rumors of rare cancer clusters, and I know people living within miles of Hanford who got very sick or lost their lives. Who is collecting and tracking this data? And this has been an ongoing issue. There was a big downwinder lawsuit, which, as Tom Mueller pointed out, was fought heavily by the government, and it did not end well. The U.S. government spent many tens of millions of dollars fighting this lawsuit, and settlements were eventually reached with many of the survivors. There, frankly, has not been a large study of the cancer clusters around the Hanford site, and certainly not one that has taken into account all of the radionuclides and all the chemicals. And so the answer to the question is, who is collecting and tracking this data? Basically no one right now, and it really does need to happen. As an organization, we've gone out as Hanford Challenge and collected environmental samples around the site and found pockets of hotspots here and there. We found plutonium in fish, which you shouldn't find. We found radioactive materials, including plutonium and americium, in car filters. So it doesn't stay there. Hanford leaks, and it's going to have a health impact. We know that workers have higher rates of cancer there, and there's a law administered by the U.S. Labor Department that keeps track of that, and it's called the Energy Employees Occupational Compensation Program Act. And you can check out how many people are getting compensation from that. Tom or Bob, do you have any comment on this at all?
I think you covered it pretty well for mine.
Okay. And I have a question for Tom Mueller. What's a story about a Hanford whistleblower that really sticks out for you?
Oh, there are so many. I mean, it really, that's the alarming thing is the waves of whistleblowers that have come over time. The story of Ed Bricker that you spoke about at the very beginning is, this is a Mormon elder, an absolute straight shooter. Didn't dance, didn't drink, didn't play cards, and the extent to which they used military level in security and attempted to infiltrate his friends and turn them against him. Really it's something out of a spy novel. And yet it's absolutely true. And again, this is someone who is trying to do good for people working on this side. He didn't have any ulterior motives. He wasn't a Russian spy. This is one of us, right? That's how they treat him. So there's a message there, but you see the same mechanisms again and again, and you see the DOE, frankly, targeting whistleblowers for abuse and handing their names over to the contractors for further action. It's very disappointing to see the level of support that people who are really genuinely working for the common good receive at Hanford.
And what have been the most successful ways to elevate a whistleblower's concern and make sure that the issues they are raising are addressed? Is a question from Liz. And I'll take a quick shot at that and just say the public has to know, Congress has to know, find the agencies that can do investigations. But it is that exposure that is the most important aspect. Being right on the details is important. People are risking a lot to come forward, and but the more exposure you can get, a tipping point in the waste treatment plant story was a huge expose in USA Today that was like 3 full pages, in the Rachel Maddow show, and Congress saying, "Okay, we're going to have hearings now." And suddenly the Secretary of Energy is on the site saying, "What the heck is going on out here?" And that's what it takes sometimes is to get to that level of visibility. They say sunshine is the best disinfectant. And that certainly was the case there. Any comment on that question, Bob?
I think when it comes to the role of whistleblowers, I'm going to defer to the guy who wrote the book on it. If he's got any feedback on that one.
Well, strategically, I learned this to a large extent from Tom Carpenter and others who run organizations that nurture whistleblowing relationships. Tom has contacts with people he can't even talk about on the site, but they are our early warning system. If something strange is happening in Hanford, his phone starts ringing. And the ability to take a disclosure without harming the person who made it and make sure it reaches the public via a lawsuit, via a Susanna Frame King 5 story, via a chapter in a book, or any number of other ways. That's a real delicate strategy to make sure that it's credible, that it's proven, and that the right people are pressured to take action. I think also we just need to look at what's happening on the Hill in Washington, the other Washington, and how much in my look at the bit plant story with Walt Status in particular, the emails trails in which they're talking about their lobbyists and the controlling the message and making this blow over. Unfortunately, contractors have too much power in DC, and they are the dog wagging the tail of the DOE and everybody else, and they can wait them out. And if we really are interested in our health and fixing Hanford, which is central to our, we have to reclaim some control of that process as well.
All right. Well, thank you, Tom, and thank you, Bob. We are running out of time here. We said we'd have this go to about an hour or a little over an hour. You can get more information about Hanford by going to hanfordchallenge.org, the website. You can look at Tom Mueller's book, Crisis of Conscience, and I think there will be a link to that coming up here soon. And, go to our website and check out the upcoming public comment periods, which are about to happen. So definitely get involved. And commenting on that, it makes a difference. We've got a really active Department of Ecology on Hanford. They're paying close attention to what's going on there. They communicate with us. So, I think we've got a good partnership with the state of Washington, with Bob, with Governor Inslee. And that's what it takes, really, to make sure that the cleanup is going to stay on track to protect these people working out there. So thanks very much for tuning in. And Candace, are you going to take over from here?
Yeah, I just wanted to come on and say thank you to you all. Thank you, Tom Carpenter, Tom Mueller, and Bob Ferguson, for your expertise helping inform us about this important issue. And thank you all for watching tonight. If you're interested in more content from Town Hall, you can follow our Crowdcast channel by clicking the follow button in the top right corner. We have in the chat, I'm going to post this right after I'm done here, so you can hang on, but I'll post those handles for Hanford Challenge so you can stay informed with their work, as well as a link to take a look at Tom Mueller's book. You can also donate to Town Hall here if you're so inclined by clicking the donate button at the bottom of your screen. So thank you again so much to our speakers and to our audience. Everybody stay safe, and we'll see you next time.